Okay, we will tell about how the first working day of the G20 summit took place. Three topics were discussed: energy security, food security, and the situation with the global healthcare. We have outlined our principled and well-known stance on the reasons due to the crisis in energy and food security. We have demonstrated the role of the Western countries in this crisis. The president talked about this on a number of occasions when he described what happened when the coronavirus pandemic, broke out, when the Western countries emitted trillions of currency to buy food, to buy medicine. And it exacerbated this crisis, and it was done with the result to damage the developing countries. Some days ago, the Bloomberg agency published its investigation, where the conclusion was that the measures taken by the European countries to strengthen their energy security led to the exacerbation of the energy poverty in the developing world. We have said that these matters should not be politicized. We should go away from using energy as a mean to resolve some political issues, as it's been done, for example, with the Nord Stream. We are standing for the G20 to deal with the practical matters, to remove any artificial, any discriminatory obstacles in the global energy markets. And we suggested to finally open free and honest dialogue between the suppliers of the energy and its consumers. We'll see what the reaction will be. As for food, as it has been said on many occasions by the president, we demonstrated the capacity of the Russian Federation to provide stable situation at the food market with the wheat and fertilizers, and we show the obstacles that are still remaining in this path, despite the deal within the package initiative of the Secretary General that the UN is going to deal with lifting all the obstacles on the path of our fertilizer and cereal export. And despite all these restrictions, despite all these sanctions, we have already supplied 10.5 ton of wheat, of grain, mostly wheat. 60% was exported to Asia, and some 40% was exported to the African countries. And as for the healthcare, we advocated more active international cooperation to increase preparedness for infection diseases like the pandemic of the coronavirus infection. We supported the efforts by the World Health Organization as the main coordinating body, as the main response of the global community to these challenges in healthcare, these new threats to mankind. And we supported the idea of establishing to have a fund between the WHO and the World Bank, and this fund will take care of the needs of the developing countries in this regard. And we talked about the need to implement, to carry out the solutions that we have, and vaccination should be available to everyone. And we gave examples that show that the actual picture is different from the goals. For example, because of this difference, because of this chasm in these approaches to the vaccination, its level in the developed countries was 60%, and in the poorest countries, this level was at some 5%. And another suggestion was that we should move away from monopolizing pharmaceutical markets. We reminded that the Russian vaccine Sputnik V was the first one that was developed, and despite that its registration in WHO and the European Commission was artificially hindered. It proved its efficiency in more than 95% of the cases, and it was successfully supplied to 70 states. And the last topic within the context of healthcare that we talked about the biological security. First of all, within the context of that military biological activity that the United States, under their Pentagon programs, have deployed in dozens of countries in all the regions of the world, especially in Eurasia, along the borders of the Russian Federation and the Chinese People's Republic. And we have also noted that our attempts to find out what these military biology experts are doing, so they are met with some resistance within the convention and within the Security Council of the UN, where we raised this issue recently. But we will continue to try to establish effective, transparent, controlling mechanism to monitor these kind of programs. And on the sidelines, I had some brief encounters with participants from various countries. I can talk to you in detail later if you are interested in hearing that. What the joint convention signed and agree on all its items. Does this document mention Ukraine? I guess you mean not the convention, but the declaration. Yes, the work on it has almost been completed. It will be approved after tomorrow's summit, after tomorrow's meeting, where we are going to talk about digitalization. We are going to be represented by Anton Solana, finance minister. The declaration that you're talking about covers all the directions, all the areas that were discussed: food, energy, healthcare, digitalization. Yes, our Western counterparts were trying to politicize this declaration, and they were trying to drag in those statements that would condemn the actions of the Russian Federation on behalf of the entire G20, including us. But we insisted that if they really want to cover these issues, well, even though it's not on the agenda and it's not within the competence of the G20 group, so let's be honest, then let's put down on paper that we have certain divergences. Yes, there is war, hybrid war in Ukraine that the West has started, and they were preparing this war for many years, starting from the moment when they supported coup d'etat, blatant anti-Russian neo-Nazi forces. Since then, NATO has been holding exercises, supplying weapons. Well, you know what happened next, and reminding of the Minsk Accords as well, and the preparation for the military campaign against Donbass. That's why in this draft declaration there is a reference to the fact that the parties exchanged opinions on this matter. The parties reiterated their stances that were explained on many occasions in the United Nations Organization and the Security Council and during the General Assembly, in particular when the most recent resolution was approved. It was put up to vote, and we reaffirmed that everyone has its own estimation of what has been enshrined in there. The West added this formula that many delegations condemned Russia, and we said that there were alternative perspective, alternative points of view, and we think this is enough, because going too deep into this topic is absolutely not what the G20 should deal with. We should deal with the practical matters to make the Kyiv regime stop promoting anti-Russian Russophobic policies. In my statement, I asked what would our Western counterparts do if Belgium, for example, banned French language, same as Ukraine banned Russian language in all the areas? Or what would the UK do if Ireland banned English language? I got no response. as you understand. But I think that if the West was so obsessed with this idea of theirs, and probably they attempted to use this summit to undermine the G20, undermine the joint declaration, and to blame it on us, they failed in this. Ivan Protorov, Channel 1. Did the U.S. manage to turn the G20 summit into an anti-Russian platform by replacing the global agenda of the summit? And what did you talk about during these brief encounters? Were there some voices to discuss these issues? Well, the main work on those essential matters that are on the agenda of the G20. Recently, this work was done at the level of the experts, of the ministers, and it is reflected in the declaration that describes these parts. As for the Ukrainian issue, the United States and all their allies during the discussions today, they were quite aggressive and accusing Russia of, as they put it, unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. Well, you know, the more often they talk about the unprovoked aggression, the more, I guess, everyone gets convinced that this aggression was provoked by them, and it's not an aggression, it is an operation to protect the lawful interests of Russia that saw military threats emanating from its borders, and it is an operation to protect the Russian population of Donbass. And you know, I've been thinking about this comparison when previously we sat together at the party congresses during the Soviet times. Well, not us in the foreign ministry, but for example, at some kind of factory, they were discussing the 5-year plans, how they will be implemented. Well, it's all about the production matters, seemingly, but it was matter of good tone. Before starting this discussion, they should talk about the American imperialism and condemn it. That's what the Western politicians are doing now. That's how they treat the agenda of such summits. We always talk about the fact that we are supported by the countries that comprise 3/4 of the population of the world, and they support the ideas of the multipolar world that Vladimir Putin was talking about during the Valdai Forum. It's really hard to fight against transnational corporation, and we can see how the military supports us during the joint exercises. But what do the diplomats say? What kind of support are we getting in this diplomatic field? How can it look in the future? Well, the answer will be really simple. No one but the West, except for West and its closest allies, closest satellites, did not join the anti-Russian sanctions. And all the third world countries, when they talk about this, and one can't help but talking about it because the West is making it a priority by throwing in this topic of Ukraine into any kind of discussions. The third world countries are calling for the prompt cessation of hostilities to stop this war, but they are perfectly aware that Ukraine is the one that is stopping this process, and they put it into their laws. They are forbidden to have negotiations with the president of the Russian Federation, so we should not be the ones to answer this question. And I mentioned that when I briefly talked with President Macron and Chancellor Scholz. You had a meeting with Guterres. Did you talk about the Green Deal that is due to expire in a few days, and on which conditions Russia will be ready to renew this Green Deal? Conditions are very simple. They are stipulated in the initial agreement that had 2 parts to it, and both parts were approved as a package. The first one is the export of the Ukrainian grain, which is something that is being done after the Ukrainian armed forces used the humanitarian corridor that was supposed to export grain. They used it for their military goals. We stopped this deal, but then Ukrainians said that they would not do this anymore. Our Turkish counterparts and our Western counterparts as well, they have this understanding that they should stop Ukraine from continuing with this kind of unacceptable actions. And the second part was lifting all the restrictions on the path of the Russian grain experts. And I should give credit to the Secretariat of the UN and personally to the Secretary General. They are doing their best. But it's been 5 months, and as for the practical results, we have not accomplished anything. But during today's meeting, the Secretary General talked about the promises that were given to him in writing as well, given to him by the United States and by the European Union. And there are all kinds of good intentions described in it. And if it will be implemented, then all the restrictions on the path of our grain and fertilizers will be lifted. But it's not about paperwork. It's all about how it will be put into practice. We are getting assurances from the Secretary General, and he's talking that he's getting these assurances from his Western counterparts, that all the economy operators that are participants of all the supply chains for the Russian fertilizers and Russian grain, they are getting signals that they will not be sanctioned against if they will start interacting and cooperating, organize the trade deals with our deal, including our vessels entering European ports or foreign vessels entering our ports, and allowing for comprehensive operations of our Russell House Bank and the normal insurance fees for our ships. So all these promises are out there. Hopefully they will be put into practice. At least the Secretary General assured us that it's a priority matter for him. RF International. Mr. Lavrov, first of all, we are glad to see you in good health here, not in some Indonesian hospital. But my question is, I've got a feeling that the Western partners are changing this rhetoric regarding their relations with Russia. We hear more and more such words as peace, negotiations, talks. Now the EU has problems with the new package of sanctions. What has brought about these kind of changes, and what can we expect? It's hard for me to judge because I don't know what's happening in someone else's minds, and especially so for the European Union. It's really dark in their minds, and it's really hard to see what's going on there. I had a brief talk with President Macron, who reaffirmed his willingness to continue to talk to President Putin to look for any kind of solution that will help to regulate the situation, as he put it. But I reminded him that all the problems are on the Ukrainian side, and they are categorically refusing to have any kind of talks, and they are giving the demands that are unrealistic and inadequate to the current situation. Yesterday, European Union started the training of the Ukrainian military at their territory. They are going to prepare 15,000 soldiers. How this decision could affect the future of the Ukrainian crisis, and does this program make the European Union a party to the conflict in Ukraine? I think that the European Union and NATO are a hybrid party to this hybrid conflict, hybrid war. In Ukraine, I'm talking about arms supplies and about training personnel, training soldiers, and helping in receiving all kind of intelligence data, reconnaissance data, and the Americans are helping with the targeting, and instructors are working on the ground. And I'm not even talking about thousands of mercenaries. And if we talk about this particular decision to launch this training mission, military training mission, well, it's some kind of a double thing, double consciousness. Because at the same time, like I said, President Macron and Chancellor Scholz and other European leaders are talking about the need to move on to the looking for a peaceful solution, peaceful settlement. So it's like some kind of bipolar disease, or as President Putin put it, specific, non-traditional formats of interstate relations, but we are trying to get used to it. We are seeing all kinds of things happening. Do you personally see any signals from the West to Kyiv for the talks, and what should happen for these talks to happen? Well, I can't repeat it anymore. We've been saying this. The president has been saying that we are not refusing to have talks. The Ukraine is the one who are refusing these talks, and the longer they wait, the harder it will be to agree. As for the signals from the West to Zelensky, we read all kinds of statements that are referring to some kind of anonymous sources. There are rumors that the American administration is telling Zelensky to agree to negotiate more, but then they say that it's not about him behaving in a constructive manner, but they just want to relieve that part of the Western elites that are getting tired of supplying arms to the Kyiv regime. Zelensky had an interesting speech at today's summit. The chair of the G20 group decided to allow him to speak. It was a pre-recorded statement, and it lasted 20 minutes, even though every participant had some 3 minutes, so that everyone had time to talk. Zelensky took 20 minutes. It was impossible to interrupt him because it was a pre-recorded video. Probably they didn't want to switch it off to stop it, but from his speech, the only conclusion that I have is that he is not heeding any kind of Western advice. And I'm not going to list everything he said. It was pretty hostile, pretty Russophobic, pretty aggressive. But I think the best way to sum up this speech and state of this man is this phrase that was not really the right place to use it. He said that the D-Day, the Allies that entered Normandy, has become a turning point in World War II. So make your own conclusions from this kind of statement, this kind of reference. TASS agency. Today, Politico said that Russia is preparing ground for possible talks between Russia and Ukraine because the winter is coming. And yesterday you had a conversation with Chavoshulu, but we heard no details from our side or from the other side. What did you talk about it? As for the statements that the Americans are preparing some kind of grounds for some kind of negotiations, we keep hearing these rumors and then they disappear. We do not react to this anymore. We want to see real proof that the West is interested in disciplining Zelensky, to explain to him that it can't go on anymore like that, that it's not in the interest of the Ukrainian people and not in his interest. As for our conversation with Chavoshulu, we talked about the joint declaration of the G20, and we talked about the Green Deal part of it. And about our meeting, we are not planning it because it has just taken place today. Thank you.